The faded cardboard boxes in Alan Maldonado's attic had been gathering dust for decades, each one filled with reels of film that his granddaughter Alejandra Santiago had never bothered to look through. "Just some old movies nobody cares about anymore," Alan would say with a hint of sadness in his voice whenever she'd ask about his collection. But Alejandra never really asked. Comment where you're watching from today, as we dive into a story about misjudgment, family legacy, and a revelation that would change everything. Alejandra was 22, ambitious and forward-looking. She had recently graduated from film school, with honors, landing an entry-level position at Paramount Pictures that most of her classmates would have killed for. Her world was digital, streamlined, and cutting-edge. The analog past held little interest for her, especially when it was housed in her grandfather's modest bungalow on the outskirts of Los Angeles, a place that seemed frozen in time. The summer, air hung thick and heavy as Alejandra pulled into her grandfather's driveway. Her sleek black BMW looked out of place next to Alan's weathered pickup truck. She hadn't visited in nearly 6 months, too busy with her new job and the exciting life she was building for herself. But her mother, Amanda Gutierrez, had insisted she check on him. "He's not getting any younger and he misses you," she had said during their weekly phone call. Alejandra had reluctantly agreed, convincing herself it was just a quick visit, an obligation to be fulfilled before heading back to her real life. Alan's home smelled of coffee and old books as Alejandra stepped inside. The walls were adorned with faded photographs, many in black and white, showing people she didn't recognize and places she'd never been. Her grandfather sat in his favorite armchair, reading a newspaper, an actual printed newspaper, not a digital subscription on a tablet like everyone else she knew. "There's my Hollywood hotshot," Alan said, his weathered face breaking into a warm smile. He stood up slowly, his joints creaking in protest. At 78, he moved with deliberate care, but his eyes still sparkled with life. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten where I live." Alejandra hugged him, noting how much smaller he felt in her arms than she remembered. "Been busy, Grandpa. The studio doesn't run itself, you know." Alan chuckled. "I imagine not. Come, sit down. Tell me about all these famous people you're working with now." They settled into a comfortable rhythm, Alejandra sharing sanitized stories about her work, carefully omitting the long hours, the demanding bosses, and the constant pressure. To prove herself, she talked about the latest blockbuster they were promoting, a high-octane action film starring the industry's newest heartthrob. "Movies these days," Alan shook his head. "All explosions and computer graphics, not much substance." Alejandra felt a flicker of irritation. This was why she didn't visit more often. Her grandfather was stuck in the past, unable to appreciate how far filmmaking had come. "That's not fair, Grandpa. The technology we have now allows for storytelling that wasn't possible before." "Technology doesn't tell stories, Alejandra. People do." Alan's voice was gentle but firm. "The best films are about connection, about humanity. All the special effects in the world can't replace that." Before she could argue, her phone buzzed. A message from her boss, Patrick Gomez, an emergency at work. They needed her to come in right away. "I have to go, Grandpa," she said, already standing. "Work emergency." Disappointment flickered across Alan's face, but he nodded. "Of course, duty calls." As she headed for the door, Alan called after her. "Before you go, would you mind bringing down one of the boxes from the attic? My knees aren't what they used to be, and I've been wanting to go through some of my old things." Alejandra hesitated, torn between obligation and the urgent message on her phone. "Fine," she sighed. "Just one box, and then I really have to leave." The attic was stifling, the summer heat intensified under the sloped roof. Dust motes danced in the beams of light that filtered through a small window. Cardboard boxes were stacked neatly against the walls, each labeled in her grandfather's precise handwriting. One section caught her eye, a row of boxes marked film, reels, 1970s, 1990s. Curious despite herself, Alejandra opened one. Inside were metal canisters, each containing a reel of film. Some had names scrawled on them, others just dates. She picked up one labeled Die Hard Behind the Scenes, 1988. Die Hard, she murmured to herself. Why would her grandfather have behind-the-scenes footage from Die Hard? She grabbed the box and headed back downstairs. Found something interesting? Alan asked as she set the box down. Why do you have Die Hard footage? Alejandra asked, holding up the canister. A slow smile spread across Alan's face. Ah, that was a good one. Bruce was at his best in that film. Bruce, as in Bruce Willis? Alejandra's voice rose in disbelief. Grandpa, what are you talking about? Alan's eyes twinkled. I never told you what I did before I retired, did I? Alejandra frowned, trying to remember. You worked in movies, right? Like set construction or something? A hearty laugh escaped Alan. Set construction? Not exactly. He reached for the box, rifling through it until he found what he was looking for, a small photo album. He handed it to Alejandra. Take a look. With growing curiosity, Alejandra opened the album. The first photo showed a much younger version of her grandfather standing next to Bruce Willis on what was clearly a movie set. Both men were smiling, arms around each other's shoulders like old friends. That was during Die Hard, Alan explained. I was the cinematographer. Alejandra's jaw dropped. The cinematographer for Die Hard? And many others. Alan nodded, seemingly enjoying her shock. Moonlighting before that, when Bruce was just getting started. Later on, I did The Fifth Element, 12 Monkeys, Pulp Fiction. Alejandra flipped through the album with trembling hands. There was her grandfather with Quentin Tarantino, with Mila Jovovich, with Samuel L. Jackson. Behind the camera, setting up shots, reviewing footage, award ceremonies, red carpets. But why didn't you ever tell me? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Alan shrugged. You never asked. And when you got into film school, you were so determined to make your own way. I didn't want to overshadow you. The revelation left Alejandra stunned. All this time, she'd been dismissing her grandfather as out of touch, irrelevant to her modern world of filmmaking. Meanwhile, he had shot some of the most iconic films of his generation. I have to go, she said suddenly, standing up. The weight of her ignorance, her dismissiveness, was crushing. I'm sorry, Grandpa. There's this work thing. Alan nodded, understanding in his eyes. Go. We'll catch up another time. As Alejandra drove back to Los Angeles, her mind raced. How could she not have known? How had she never bothered to ask about her grandfather's past? The truth was uncomfortable. She had been too wrapped up in her own ambitions, too certain of her own importance in the grand scheme of things. The next day at work, Alejandra found herself unable to focus. Images from her grandfather's photo album kept flashing in her mind. During her lunch break, she did something she should have done years ago. She searched for Alan Maldonado online. The results left her breathless. Articles from film magazines, interviews, a Wikipedia page, 3 Academy Award nominations, including 1 win for Best Cinematography, tributes from directors who had worked with him, praising his eye, his innovation, his dedication to the craft. And there was Bruce Willis, in interview after interview, mentioning Alan Maldonado as one of his favorite collaborators. Alan sees things others don't, Willis had said in a 1995 interview. He knows how to capture the essence of a scene, the heart of a character. Working with him made me a better actor. Alejandra closed her laptop, overwhelmed. She had been so wrong about her grandfather, so arrogant in her dismissal of his old movies and outdated techniques. She needed to make it right. That weekend, Alejandra returned to her grandfather's house with a proposal. She wanted to organize a screening of some of his work. Nothing fancy, just a small gathering where he could share his films and stories with family and friends. Alan seemed touched, but hesitant. "Nobody wants to see those old things," he said, echoing the words Alejandra herself had thought not long ago. "I do," she insisted, "and I bet others would too. Please, Grandpa, let me do this for you." After some persuasion, Alan agreed. Alejandra threw herself into the preparations, booking a small independent theater in Hollywood, sending out invitations to family members and a few film professors from her alma mater, who she thought might appreciate her grandfather's work. The night of the screening arrived. Alejandra had selected a few key scenes from different films Alan had worked on, ending with Die Hard, which seemed to hold a special place in his heart. She was nervous as people began to arrive. What if they didn't see the brilliance she now recognized in her grandfather's work? As they settled into their seats, Alejandra stood at the front of the theater, her heart pounding. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began. "We're here to celebrate the work of Alan Maldonado, a master cinematographer whose vision helped shape some of cinema's most iconic moments." She turned to look at her grandfather, seated in the front row, "and someone I'm very proud to call my grandfather." The lights dimmed, and the first clip began to play. A scene from Moonlighting, the TV show that had launched Bruce Willis to stardom. Alan's camera work was subtle but masterful, capturing the chemistry between the leads with an intimacy that felt almost intrusive, as if the audience was eavesdropping on a private moment. More clips followed, the tension-filled corridors of Nakatomi Plaza in Die Hard, the vibrant futuristic world of The Fifth Element, the gritty realism of Pulp Fiction. With each scene, Alejandra saw her grandfather's distinct visual signature, his use of light and shadow, his perfectly framed shots, his ability to enhance a performance with just the right angle. When the lights came up for a short intermission, the room buzzed with appreciation. Alejandra's film professors were deep in conversation, gesturing animatedly as they discussed techniques and influences. Family members looked at Alan with newfound respect. Alejandra made her way to her grandfather's side. "They love it," she whispered. Alan squeezed her hand. "It's nice to be remembered." As they prepared for the second half of the screening, the theater door opened. A latecomer slipped in, trying to be discreet, but causing a stir nonetheless. Alejandra glanced up, then froze in disbelief. Bruce Willis had just walked into the room. The actor moved with purpose, heading straight for Alan. The old cinematographer stood, a wide smile breaking across his face as Willis embraced him like a brother. "Couldn't miss this," Willis said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "When I got the invitation, I rearranged my whole schedule. Alan Maldonado taught me more about film than any director I've ever worked with." The room fell silent, all eyes on this unexpected reunion. Alejandra watched, her throat tight with emotion, as the two old friends sat together, Willis's arm draped casually over Alan's shoulders. For the remainder of the screening, Bruce Willis added his own commentary, sharing anecdotes from the sets, explaining how certain shots had come together, laughing at remembered challenges. "This scene," he said during a particularly intense moment from Die Hard, Alan insisted on hanging the camera from the ceiling to get the right angle. The producers thought he was crazy, but when they saw the footage, they knew he was right. By the end of the night, Alejandra's small tribute had transformed into something far more significant. Word had spread through Hollywood's tight-knit community, and more industry veterans had trickled in throughout the evening. Forgotten genius, they called Alan, a filmmaker's filmmaker, an unsung hero of modern cinema. As the gathering finally wound down, Alejandra found herself alone with her grandfather and Bruce Willis. "Thank you for doing this," Alan said to her, his eyes moist. "For remembering." "I should be thanking you," she replied, ashamed of how long it had taken her to appreciate his legacy. "I'm sorry I didn't understand sooner." Bruce Willis looked between them, a knowing smile on his face. That's the thing about great art, he said. It waits for you to be ready to see it. Later, as they walked to their cars, Alan put his arm around Alejandra's shoulders. You know, he said, I've been thinking about getting back behind the camera just for a small project. Nothing fancy. Alejandra felt a surge of excitement. What kind of project? I don't know yet, but I was wondering if you might want to work on it with me. I could teach you a few old-school tricks. I'd like that, Alejandra said, meaning it more than she could express. I'd like that very much. As they reached her car, Alan handed her a small metal object, a director's viewfinder, worn smooth from years of use. This was my first one, he said. I want you to have it. Alejandra held the viewfinder to her eye, looking at the world through her grandfather's lens. Suddenly, everything seemed clearer, more focused, more alive with possibility. She had dismissed the past, only to find that it held the very wisdom she needed to move forward. And she wondered how many other treasures were waiting to be discovered in those dusty boxes in her grandfather's attic. Not just film reels, but stories, lessons, a legacy she had nearly overlooked. That night, as Alejandra drove home, she made a promise to herself. She would never again be too busy, too self-important, to listen and learn from those who had walked the path before her, especially not from the quiet, unassuming man who had captured some of cinema's most unforgettable moments through his lens. Her grandfather, Alan Maldonado. In the weeks following the screening, Alejandra found herself spending more and more time at her grandfather's house. The attic, once considered a repository of outdated relics, had transformed into a treasure trove of cinematic history that she couldn't get enough of. Each canister, each reel, each photograph told a story that had been hiding in plain sight for years. Today, Alejandra sat cross-legged on the attic floor, surrounded by open boxes and carefully arranged film canisters. Alan sat in an old wooden chair nearby, watching her with amusement as she meticulously catalogued his collection. "You're taking this very seriously," he observed, handing her a cup of coffee. "Because it is serious," Alejandra replied, not looking up from her notebook. "Do you realize what you have here? This isn't just your career, it's film history, and it was almost lost because I was too self-absorbed to care." Alan shook his head. "Don't be so hard on yourself. We all have blind spots when it comes to family." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Alejandra wasn't expecting anyone, and Alan rarely had visitors these days. Curious, she moved to the small attic window and peered out. "It's Donald Brooks," she said, surprised. Donald was one of the film professors who had attended the screening. He'd been particularly enthusiastic about Alan's work, asking detailed questions about techniques and equipment that had been cutting edge in their day. Alan struggled to his feet. "Donald?" Now there's a blast from the past. He was a camera assistant on The Fifth Element, bright kid, always asking questions. They made their way downstairs to greet their visitor. Donald stood on the porch, clutching a leather portfolio and looking uncharacteristically nervous for a tenured professor. "Alan," he said, extending his hand, "it's good to see you again. And Alejandra, thank you for inviting me to the screening. It was illuminating." "Come in," Alan gestured toward the living room. "What brings you by?" Once they were seated, Donald opened his portfolio. "I'm here with a proposition. After seeing your work again at the screening, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The way you captured movement, the framing, the lighting. It's something we've lost in modern filmmaking." He pulled out a sleek brochure and handed it to Alan. "I'm organizing a masterclass series at the university. Lost Techniques of Visual Storytelling. I want you to be our keynote speaker and workshop leader." Alan stared at the brochure, then at Donald. "Me? Teach? I haven't been behind a camera in almost 15 years. Exactly. Donald leaned forward, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. Today's film students only know digital. They've never loaded a camera with actual film, never had to calculate exposure without a computer to help them, never had to make creative decisions knowing they won't see the results until the rushes come back from the lab. These constraints bred a kind of disciplined creativity that's becoming extinct. Alejandra watched her grandfather's face, recognizing the flicker of interest in his eyes, even as he shook his head. "I don't know, Donald. Teaching wasn't ever my strong suit." "That's not how Bruce Willis tells it," Donald countered. "At the screening, he talked about how much he learned from you, how you showed him ways to move that would play better on camera, how you explained the emotional impact of different lenses." "That was different," Alan protested. "That was just work." "This would be just work too," Donald said. "Paid work, I might add. But more importantly, it would be preservation. Your knowledge, your experience. It shouldn't die with you, Alan." Blunt statement hung in the air. Alejandra felt a chill despite the warm day. The idea of her grandfather's mortality wasn't something she liked to dwell on, but Donald's words forced her to confront it. One day, Alan would be gone, and with him, a direct connection to a golden era of filmmaking. "I'll think about it," Alan finally said. After Donald left, Alejandra found her grandfather back in the attic, rummaging through a box she hadn't opened yet. "Are you going to do it?" she asked, sitting on a nearby trunk. Alan pulled out a battered leather case. "I'm not sure. It's been a long time since I've thought of myself as having anything to teach." He opened the case, revealing an old 35mm camera. "But maybe..." He trailed off, his fingers running over the camera with the tenderness of greeting an old friend. Alejandra could see he was lost in memories. "You should do it," she said softly. "Those students would be lucky to learn from you." Alan looked up, a mischievous sparkle in his eyes. "Only if you'll assist me. I'm too old to be hauling equipment around." "Deal," Alejandra said without hesitation. The idea of working alongside her grandfather, seeing him in his element, learning from him directly, it was an opportunity she wouldn't miss. The next day, Alejandra arrived at her office at Paramount to find Patrick Gomez waiting for her. Her boss rarely sought her out personally, preferring to delegate through a chain of assistants and coordinators. "Alejandra," he said, his voice unusually warm. "Just the person I wanted to see. Come, walk with me." Puzzled, she followed him down the corridor toward the executive offices. "I was at a dinner party last night," Patrick began. "Bruce Willis was there." Alejandra's stomach tightened. Since the screening, news of her connection to Alan Maldonado had spread through the industry grapevine. Some colleagues had started treating her differently, with more respect, but also with a certain wariness, as if reassessing her in light of this prestigious family tie. "Bruce mentioned your grandfather," Patrick continued. Quite enthusiastically, in fact. "He seems to think Alan Maldonado is some kind of unsung genius." "He is," Alejandra said simply. Patrick stopped walking and turned to face her. "Why didn't you ever mention him? All this time, we could have been leveraging that connection." The question revealed so much about Patrick's worldview, about the industry itself, connections to be leveraged, relationships as currency. It was exactly how Alejandra had viewed her career until recently, a series of strategic moves on a competitive chessboard. "I didn't know," she admitted. "Not until a few weeks ago. My grandfather never talked about his work, and I never asked." Patrick looked genuinely confused by this concept. "Well, now that you do know, we should discuss how to use this. The publicity department would love to do a feature, Hollywood Legacy, following in famous footsteps or something like that. And we have that new Willis project in development. Maybe your grandfather would consult, for old time's sake." The suggestion made Alejandra's skin crawl. Use her grandfather's legacy as a publicity stunt? Exploit his relationship with Bruce Willis for corporate gain? I don't think that would interest him, she said carefully. He's very private. Patrick waved a dismissive hand. Everyone has their price. Find out what his is. This could be big. For your career, Alejandra. Really put you on the fast track. Before she could formulate a response that wouldn't get her fired, Patrick's phone rang. He answered it immediately, the conversation with Alejandra already forgotten as he moved on to the next item on his agenda. Back at her desk, Alejandra stared at her computer screen without seeing it. Just weeks ago, she would have jumped at Patrick's suggestion. She would have seen it as an opportunity, a stepping stone, a way to advance faster in a cutthroat industry. Now, the very thought made her feel slightly ill. When her phone rang, she answered absently, still lost in thought. Alejandra. Santiago? The voice on the other end was unfamiliar. Yes, speaking. This is Jordan Rodriguez from the Academy Film Archive. I understand you're Alan Maldonado's granddaughter. Alejandra sat up straighter. Yes, I am. We've been trying to reach him. We're putting together a retrospective on innovative cinematography of the 1980s and 90s, and his work is central to our thesis. Would it be possible to speak with him about accessing some of his personal collection? We understand he may have behind-the-scenes materials that aren't in any public archive. This request felt different from Patrick's. This wasn't about exploitation. It was about recognition, preservation, celebration. I think he might be interested, Alejandra said. Let me talk to him and get back to you. That evening, Alejandra drove to her grandfather's house straight from work, eager to share the archive's request. She found Alan in the backyard, setting up an old projector on the patio. A white sheet had been hung on the side of the garage, creating a makeshift screen. What's all this? She asked, setting down her bag. Alan looked up with a grin. Outdoor movie night. I used to do this for your mom when she was little. He gestured to a box nearby. Found some old home movies. Thought you might like to see them. Alejandra's heart swelled. Another piece of family history she had never bothered to explore. I'd love that. As they set up folding chairs and made popcorn, Alejandra told Alan about the call from the Academy Film Archive. They want to feature your work in a retrospective. They're interested in your personal collection, especially any behind-the-scenes material. Alan considered this as he threaded film through the projector. Might be nice to have some of that stuff preserved properly. These old films don't last forever, you know. So you'll do it? Why not? Better than leaving it all to gather dust. He finished with the projector and sat down beside her. Now let's watch your mum's 5th birthday party. She was quite the performer even then. The projector whirred to life, casting flickering images onto the sheet. A young Amanda Gutierrez danced across the screen, her face alight with joy as she twirled in a princess dress. Behind the camera, Alan's voice could be heard, encouraging her, laughing with her. As they watched home movie after home movie, Alejandra realized that her grandfather had been documenting life with the same artistry he brought to his professional work. The way he captured a sudden smile, a moment of contemplation, a burst of childish excitement. These weren't just recordings. They were carefully composed visual poems about the people he loved. Did you ever think about making your own films? She asked during a break to change reels. Not just shooting other people's stories, but telling your own? Alan's hands stilled on the projector. Once, he admitted, I had a screenplay. Started shopping it around in the early 90s. What happened? Life happened. Your grandmother got sick. I needed steady work, not the gamble of a first-time director, so I stuck with what I knew. He shrugged. No regrets. I worked on some great films with some incredible people. What was your screenplay about? Alan was quiet for a moment, as if deciding whether to share this long-buried dream. It was about a cinematographer, he finally said. A guy who spends his life capturing everyone else's stories while his own life passes by, unseen, unrecorded. "Do you still have it?" Alejandra asked softly. "Somewhere." Alan nodded toward the house. "Probably in one of those boxes you've been going through. Would you let me read it?" Alan looked surprised, then pleased. "If you want to. But it's old now, probably feels dated. Or maybe it feels timeless," Alejandra suggested. "Maybe it was just waiting for the right moment." The next day, Alejandra called in sick to work. Instead of going to the studio, she went to her grandfather's house and spent hours searching through boxes until she found a faded manila envelope labeled "The Cameraman, Draft 3. She read it sitting on the attic floor, surrounded by the physical artifacts of her grandfather's career. The screenplay was beautiful, subtle, poignant, with a visual language described so precisely she could see the film playing in her mind as she read. It wasn't dated at all. Its themes of observation versus participation, of seeing versus being seen, felt startlingly relevant. When she finished reading, Alejandra sat in silence for a long time. Then she pulled out her phone and called Donald Brooks. "Professor Brooks, it's Alejandra Santiago. I have a question about that masterclass series you're planning. Would there be room for a screenwriting component? And maybe some actual production work?" By the time Alan returned from his grocery shopping, Alejandra had filled 3 pages of a legal pad with notes and ideas. She heard him calling for her from downstairs. "Up here, Grandpa," she shouted. "I found your screenplay." Alan appeared at the top of the attic stairs, slightly out of breath from the climb. "Oh, what did you think?" Alejandra held his gaze. "I think we should make it." "Make it?" Alan echoed, disbelief written across his weathered face. "After all, these years, Alejandra, that's a young man's dream, gathering dust in an old man's attic." "No," Alejandra insisted, rising to her feet with the screenplay clutched to her chest. "It's a beautiful story that deserves to be told. And who better to tell it than the person who lived it?" She moved toward her grandfather, her eyes bright, with conviction. "Think about it. You have the knowledge, the experience, the connections. I have the energy, the fresh perspective, and access to the latest technology. Together, we could bring this to life." Alan's expression softened, a mixture of amusement and wistfulness crossing his features. "You sound just like your grandmother when you get fired up like that. She always believed in this script too." He sighed, taking the screenplay from Alejandra's hands and flipping through the pages. "But making a film takes more than enthusiasm. It takes money, resources, a crew." "Let me worry about that," Alejandra said confidently. "The industry has changed since you wrote this. Independent films have more pathways now, streaming platforms, film festivals, alternative distribution models. We don't need a major studio backing us." Alan studied his granddaughter's face, searching for any sign of doubt. Finding none, he allowed himself a small smile. "You're serious about this?" "Completely serious," Alejandra confirmed. "Professor Brooks is already on board to help with the masterclass series. What if we turn your screenplay into the practical component? The students learn by doing, working alongside an industry veteran. It's a win-win." The spark in Alan's eyes grew brighter. Using the university's equipment and facilities would certainly cut down on costs. "Exactly," Alejandra nodded eagerly. "And I bet some of your old colleagues might be willing to contribute their expertise for a day or two. Bruce Willis seemed pretty enthusiastic about supporting your work." Bruce in front of the camera again, Alan mused, then shook his head. "No, that's thinking too big. This should be about new talent, fresh faces." "Why not both?" Alejandra suggested. "Emerging actors for most roles, with maybe 1 or 2 veterans in key parts. It would add credibility to the project and give the students a chance to work with established professionals." Alan lowered himself onto a nearby trunk, still holding the screenplay. For the first time since Alejandra had reconnected with him, he looked his age, not frail, but weighted with years of deferred dreams and practical compromises. "I never thought I'd revisit this," he admitted quietly. "After your grandmother died, I packed it away with everything else that hurt too much to look at." Alejandra knelt beside him, placing her hand on his. "Maybe that's exactly why you should do it now. Not to reopen old wounds, but to honor her memory, to finish what you started together." Alan was silent for a long moment, then nodded once decisively. "All right, let's do it. But if we're going to make this film, we're going to make it right. No cutting corners on the essentials." "Deal," Alejandra agreed, already mentally calculating budgets and timelines. "First step, updating the screenplay. It's strong, but some of the technical references are outdated." "I'll work on that tonight," Alan said, a new energy animating his movements as he stood. "You start looking into what we'll need from the university, what kind of budget we're talking about." As they descended from the attic, a sense of shared purpose humming between them. Neither could have predicted how quickly their modest idea would snowball. Within weeks, what had begun as a small, independent project attached to a university master class had evolved into something much larger. Word had spread through Alan's extensive network of industry connections. Equipment manufacturers offered the latest cameras and lenses, eager to have their gear associated with the comeback project of a cinematography legend. Former assistants, now established professionals themselves, volunteered their services. Even studio executives began calling, inquiring about potential distribution deals. Alejandra found herself in the unexpected position of managing her grandfather's sudden return to relevance in an industry that had all but forgotten him. Her own standing at Paramount shifted subtly. Colleagues who had dismissed her as just another ambitious assistant now approached her with scripts and proposals, hoping to gain access to Alan Maldonado and his burgeoning project. "It's gotten out of hand," Alejandra confessed one evening as she and Alan reviewed the latest budget projections in his living room. "We've got offers from 3 different production companies wanting to finance the film, a list of A-list actors interested in reading for parts, and Patrick keeps hinting that Paramount might want first-look rights." Alan looked up from his notes, glasses perched on the end of his nose. "Is that a problem? Isn't this what you wanted?" Alejandra hesitated. "Yes and no. I wanted to make your film, to see your vision realized. But I'm worried all these big players getting involved will change the project. Corporate money always comes with corporate control." "Ah," Alan nodded knowingly. "You're learning what I knew 30 years ago when I was shopping this around. Everyone wants to be part of something authentic, but then they want to make it less authentic to make it more commercial." "Exactly," Alejandra sighed. "So what do? We can't finance this ourselves." Alan removed his glasses, polishing them thoughtfully with the hem of his shirt. "We need to find the right partner, someone who respects the integrity of the project but has the resources to help us realize it properly." As if on cue, Alejandra's phone rang. The screen displayed a number she didn't recognize. "Alejandra Santiago," she answered professionally. "Miss Santiago, this is Thomas Hayes," a deep voice replied. "I believe you know my work." Alejandra's breath caught. Thomas Hayes was an independent producer known for championing artistically ambitious projects that still managed to find commercial success. He had a reputation for protecting directors' visions while skillfully navigating the business side of filmmaking. "Mr. Hayes," she managed to respond. "Yes, of course. What can I do for you?" "I've been hearing about your grandfather's project." "The cameraman, is it? I'd like to discuss the possibility of coming on board as producer." Alejandra mouthed Thomas Hayes to her grandfather, whose eyebrows shot up in recognition. "We're still in the early stages," Alejandra said cautiously. "Perfect time to get involved before things get too complicated." Hayes replied. I understand. Alan wants to direct, with you as his partner. I like that dynamic. Experience and fresh perspective working together. I think I can help make this happen without compromising the essence of the story. Why this project? Alejandra asked directly. You could produce anything you want. Why a first-time director's personal story? There was a pause on the line. Because I started as a camera assistant, Hayes finally said, on small independent films where every frame mattered because film stock was expensive. Alan Maldonado was a legend to people like me, the cinematographer who could tell a story with light and shadow better than most directors could with dialogue. If he's finally stepping behind the camera to tell his own story, I want to be part of making that happen. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Alejandra looked at her grandfather, who had been watching her side of the conversation intently. Could we meet to discuss this further? She asked. How about tomorrow? I'm in Los Angeles until Friday. They arranged a meeting for the following afternoon at Alan's house, neutral territory, away from studio offices and power lunches. After ending the call, Alejandra filled her grandfather in on the conversation. Thomas Hayes, Alan mused. He has a good eye for material, and he fights for his directors. That's what I've heard anyway. This could be exactly what we need, Alejandra said. Someone with clout and resources who actually cares about the artistic integrity of the project. The meeting with Hayes exceeded their expectations. He arrived without an entourage, dressed casually and carrying a worn leather portfolio containing notes he'd made after reading Alan's screenplay, which he had somehow obtained through his industry connections. I hope you don't mind, he said, spreading out his notes on Alan's kitchen table. When I heard about the project, I had to see if it was as good as people were saying. It is. For the next 3 hours, they discussed the screenplay in detail, its themes, its visual language, its commercial potential without compromise. Hayes asked incisive questions that revealed both his business acumen and his artistic sensibility. Here's what I propose, he said finally. I secure the financing, private equity, no studio involvement at the production stage. You maintain creative control, Alan directs. Alejandra serves as producer alongside me. We shoot exactly the film you want to make, and only when it's finished do we talk to distributors. That way, they can take it or leave it, but they can't change it. Alan and Alejandra exchanged glances. And your fee? Alan asked directly. Standard producer's percentage, no upfront payment, Hayes replied. I believe in this project enough to bet on its success. By the time Hayes left, they had the framework of an agreement. As Alejandra walked him to his car, he turned to her. With unexpected seriousness, you know this won't be easy, right? First-time director, personal material, high expectations because of Alan's reputation. The industry will be watching closely, ready to celebrate or criticize. I know, Alejandra nodded, but I believe in him, and I believe in this story. Hayes smiled. Good. That conviction will get you through the hard days, and there will be hard days. As spring turned to summer, pre-production on The Cameraman accelerated. The masterclass at the university evolved into a full-fledged apprenticeship program, with film students applying from across the country for the chance to work alongside Alan Maldonado and learn while making an actual feature film. Alejandra took a leave of absence from Paramount, ignoring Patrick's dire warnings about career suicide. You're walking away from a sure thing for a passion project, he had said dismissively. The industry is littered with these vanity films that no one ever sees. But Alejandra had made her choice. The more she worked with her grandfather, the more she realized how much she had to learn from him, not just about filmmaking, but about integrity, about pursuing quality over expediency, about the patience required to capture genuine human moments. Casting began in earnest, with Hayes leveraging his connections to attract established talent for key roles. For the lead role, the cinematographer whose life paralleled Alan's own journey, they saw dozens of actors, none quite capturing the complex mixture of artistic passion and personal reticence the character required. "What about Bruce?" Hayes suggested during a particularly frustrating casting session. "He knows you, knows the world, and he's at a point in his career where he might welcome something more character-driven." Alan shook his head. "Bruce is an action star. This isn't his kind of role." "Actually," Alejandra interjected, "have you seen Moonrise Kingdom or Pulp Fiction? He has more range than people give him credit for. And there's something poetic about casting someone who was so central to your professional life to play in character based on you." The idea took root, a call was made, scripts were sent, and to everyone's surprise, Bruce Willis expressed immediate interest. "I've been waiting 30 years for Alan to direct," he told Hayes during their initial conversation. "No one understands visual storytelling better. Send me the contract." With Willis attached, the remaining cast fell quickly into place. A mixture of veterans eager to work with both Alan and Bruce, and promising newcomers selected through rigorous auditions. The university's film department hummed with activity as students prepared equipment. Location scouts explored potential shooting sites, and the wardrobe department assembled the period-appropriate clothing needed for the film's 1980s and 90s sequences. Throughout it all, Alan and Alejandra worked side by side, their collaborative rhythm growing more natural with each passing day. Alan's deep knowledge of classic filmmaking techniques complemented Alejandra's familiarity with modern production methods. Where he saw limitations, she saw opportunities. Where she might have rushed, he counseled patience. "The camera moves when there's a reason for it to move," he reminded her during a particularly complex shot design session. "Not because we can, but because we must, because the emotion of the scene demands it." These lessons, delivered casually, during long working days, were reshaping Alejandra's understanding of her chosen profession. She had entered the industry focused on advancement, on climbing the corporate ladder. Now she found herself drawn to the craft itself, to the artistry that her grandfather had always prioritized over career calculations. As production loomed closer, Alejandra found herself in Alan's attic once more, searching for reference materials from his personal collection that might help the production designer capture the authentic look of a film set from the late 1980s. Among the carefully labeled boxes, she discovered one she hadn't opened before. Elizabeth, personal. Elizabeth had been her grandmother, who died before Alejandra was old enough to form lasting memories of her. The box contained photographs, letters, and small mementos of Alan and Elizabeth's life together. At the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, Alejandra found a small leather-bound notebook with the cameraman notes and inspirations written on the first page in elegant handwriting that wasn't her grandfather's. As she flipped through the pages, Alejandra realized she was holding her grandmother's development notes on Alan's screenplay. Detailed character analyses, suggested scenes, emotional insights. The screenplay they were now preparing to film had been a collaboration between husband and wife. Elizabeth's voice was present in every page, her sensibility informing the story's most poignant moments. With the notebook clutched to her chest, Alejandra descended from the attic to find her grandfather. He was in the backyard, rehearsing a scene with a stand-in, demonstrating the precise way he wanted the actor to move through the carefully blocked sequence. "Grandpa," she called softly, not wanting to interrupt, but unable to contain her discovery. "I found something you need to see." Alan looked up, his concentration broken. Seeing what Alejandra held, his face softened with recognition and something deeper, a complex mixture of grief and gratitude. "I wondered where that had gone," he said quietly, crossing to her. "She was always the better writer. I had the visual ideas, but Elizabeth understood people, What moves them, what hurts them, what they hide from themselves. Alejandra handed him the notebook. The film we're making, it's her film too. Alan nodded, his fingers tracing the familiar handwriting. It always was. That's why I could never get it made after she was gone. It didn't feel right somehow going forward without her. And now? Alejandra asked gently. Alan looked up, his eyes clear and determined. Now I have you, different but the same spirit, the same belief in the project. He tucked the notebook carefully into his pocket. Elizabeth would have liked you, would have been proud of what you're doing. Would have been proud of what we're doing, Alejandra corrected him. Together, as they returned to the rehearsal, a new understanding flowed between them. This film was no longer just a rediscovered dream or a career opportunity. It was a legacy coming full circle. A story that had waited patiently for its moment, for the right combination of experience and fresh energy to bring it to life. The first day of principal photography dawned clear and cool. A perfect California morning. The location was a soundstage at the university that had been transformed into a 1980s film set, meticulously detailed with period-appropriate cameras, lights, and equipment sourced from industry archives and Alan's own collection. Alejandra arrived early, her stomach tight with nervous anticipation. This was it, the moment when all their planning, all their preparation would finally translate into actual footage. She found her grandfather already there, standing silently in the middle of the empty soundstage, taking in the carefully constructed world that mirrored his own past. "Ready?" she asked, joining him. Alan nodded, his expression serene. "I've been ready for 30 years. As the crew began arriving, a mix of seasoned professionals and eager students, the energy in the space shifted. Equipment was checked, final adjustments made to the set, actors escorted to makeup and wardrobe. Through it all, Alan moved with quiet authority, greeting each person by name, offering a word of encouragement or a specific instruction. Bruce Willis arrived without fanfare, slipping onto the set with minimal disruption. He embraced Alan warmly, then nodded respectfully to Alejandra. "The prodigal daughter," he said with a knowing smile. "Your grandfather hasn't stopped talking about you since that screening. Says you've got his eye." Before Alejandra could respond, Alan called for everyone's attention. The bustling activity quieted as the entire cast and crew gathered around the director for his first address. "Thank you all for being here," Alan began, his voice steady and clear. "This film has been in my heart for a very long time. It's about looking and seeing, about the difference between recording life and experiencing it. As filmmakers, we all struggle with that balance." He paused, scanning the faces around him. "Some of you have worked with me before in another lifetime. Some of you are just starting your journey in this craft we all love. All of you are here because you understand that what we do is more than entertainment. It's the preservation of human experience." A murmur of appreciation rippled through the gathering. "Now," Alan continued, his voice taking on a more practical tone, "let's make something beautiful together. Places for scene 12, please." With that simple command, the production sprang into action. Alejandra moved to her position behind the monitors, where she could watch the scene unfold both directly and through the camera's eye. Alan took his place behind the camera, working in tandem with the cinematographer, a former assistant of his who had gone on to an impressive career of his own. "Action!" Alan called, and Bruce Willis transformed before their eyes into Robert Harland, the protagonist of The Cameraman, a man who had spent his life observing others through a lens, only to realize how much of his own life had passed unwitnessed. The scene was a pivotal one, Harland reviewing footage from a film he had shot years earlier, seeing in the background of a shot his wife looking at him with an expression of such longing that it staggered him. It was a moment that encapsulated the film's central theme, that sometimes the most important things are happening just outside the frame we've chosen to focus on. Bruce's performance was restrained, powerful in its quietness. The subtle shift in his expression as he recognized what he had missed, the trembling hand that reached toward the image, it was exactly what the scene required. "Cut," Alan called softly. "Perfect. Let's go once more. Same feeling, different angle." Throughout that first day and the weeks of shooting that followed, Alejandra watched her grandfather in his element, patient, precise, bringing out the best in everyone around him. There were challenges, of course, weather delays during location shoots, technical issues with some of the vintage equipment they were using for authenticity, the usual personality conflicts that arise during the pressure cooker environment of a film set, but through it all, Alan maintained a calm centeredness that infected the entire production. This wasn't a rush to the finish line, it was a deliberate, thoughtful process of creation. Each shot was considered, each performance nuanced, each detail attended to with care. As they approached the film's emotional climax, a scene where Harland finally puts down his camera to fully participate in a moment with his family, only to find himself paralyzed by the unfamiliarity of being present without the buffer of his professional role. Alan seemed to grow more focused, more determined to capture exactly what he had envisioned all those years ago. The scene required Bruce to convey a complex mixture of fear, longing, regret, and hope, all without dialogue, all through the subtlest shifts in expression and body language. They had scheduled a full day for it, knowing the emotional demands it would place on everyone involved. As they prepared for the first take, Alejandra noticed her grandfather remove something from his pocket, the small notebook that had belonged to Elizabeth. He touched it briefly, almost like a talisman, before returning it to his pocket and addressing Bruce. What passed between them wasn't audible to the rest of the crew, but Alejandra saw Bruce's expression change, becoming more vulnerable, more open. When Alan called action, what unfolded was beyond anything they had rehearsed, a raw, unguarded performance that left the crew in stunned silence. "Cut," Alan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's it. That's the film." Bruce nodded once, understanding. No additional takes were needed. Whatever Alan had shared with him had unlocked exactly what the scene required. Later, as they were reviewing the day's footage, Alejandra asked her grandfather what he had said. And to Bruce, before that final scene, "I told him about the day I realized I'd been so busy filming your mother's childhood that I'd missed experiencing it." Alan replied simply, "How I put down the camera one day and just played with her, and how terrifying and wonderful it felt to be fully present." Alejandra squeezed his hand, understanding the gift he had given both Bruce and the film, a piece of his own truth, his own vulnerability. As production wrapped and they moved into post-production, the collaboration between grandfather and granddaughter deepened further. They spent long hours in the editing suite, crafting the film with the same care that had characterized the shooting process. Alan's understanding of visual rhythm combined with Alejandra's fresh perspective on pacing for contemporary audiences, resulting in a cut that honored the story's emotional core while maintaining audience engagement. Thomas Hayes, true to his word, protected them from external pressures during this phase. "Take the time you need," he insisted. "We'll show it when it's ready, not before." When they finally screened the completed film for Hayes and a small group of trusted advisors, the response was everything they had hoped for. There were tears, thoughtful silence, and then enthusiastic discussion about the film's themes and performances. "You've made something special," Hayes told them afterward. "Something that will resonate with anyone who's ever chosen work over life or who's struggled to find balance between passion and presence." The film festival circuit embraced The Cameraman with open arms. It debuted at Sundance to standing ovations, with critics praising its visual poetry, emotional honesty, and Bruce Willis's career-best performance. From there, it traveled to festivals around the world, gathering momentum, awards, and distribution offers. Through it all, Alan remained somewhat bemused by the attention. "I just told my story," he would say in interviews. "I just made the film I wanted to make 30 years ago." But Alejandra understood what they had accomplished together. They had bridged generations, perspectives, and approaches to filmmaking. They had honored Elizabeth's memory and creative contribution. They had created something that was simultaneously deeply personal and universally relevant. The night of the film's official premiere in Los Angeles was surreal. The theater was filled with industry executives who had once rejected Alan's screenplay, stars who had worked with him throughout his cinematography career, and a new generation of filmmakers inspired by his visual style. As Alan and Alejandra walked the red carpet together, a reporter thrust a microphone toward them. "Alan, after decades behind the camera shooting other directors' films, how does it feel to finally direct your own story?" Alan glanced at Alejandra before answering. "It feels like coming home," he said simply, "and like all homecomings, it wouldn't have been possible without family to guide the way." Later that night, after the screening and the after-party, they returned to Alan's modest bungalow. Despite offers of luxurious hotel suites, he had insisted on going home. "Best to keep your feet on the ground when your head is in the clouds," he had told Alejandra with a wink. They sat on the back porch, 2 glasses of whiskey between them, looking up at the stars. "What now?" Alejandra asked softly. "Another film?" Alan considered this, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Maybe, or maybe I'll just enjoy this one for a while." He looked at her with warm curiosity. "What about you? Paramount would take you back in a heartbeat now, probably with a promotion." Alejandra shook her head. "I'm not going back, at least not to that kind of corporate environment." She took a sip of her whiskey, feeling the pleasant burn. "I've been thinking about starting a small production company, finding stories that matter, filmmakers with unique voices, the kind of projects that might get overlooked by the big studios." "Sounds like you've found your calling," Alan observed. "I had a good teacher," she replied with a smile. "Someone who showed me that the most important thing isn't climbing the ladder. It's building something meaningful, something that lasts." Alan raised his glass in acknowledgement. "To building things that last." They clinked glasses under the vast canopy of stars, a cinematographer who had finally stepped into the frame of his own life, and a young woman who had discovered that her future lay in honoring the past while creating something new. In the attic, above them, boxes of film reels and photographs still waited to be fully explored. A legacy preserved, a history rediscovered, and perhaps the seeds of stories yet to be told. Stories that would now have the chance to find their audience, because one young woman had finally taken the time to look at what had been in front of her all along. The old movies that Alejandra had once dismissed had led her to a new understanding of her grandfather, her family, and herself. They had opened a door to a world where art and life intertwined, where the act of seeing was itself an expression of love. A world where Bruce Willis could walk into their story and remind everyone that sometimes the most powerful moments happen when we put down the camera and simply live.